Well, thank you very much for your warm welcome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank our partners to make this event possible. As you know, this is our third annual AgTech event, and we are thrilled to have played at least a small part in cementing Salinas's position as the epicenter of AgTech innovation. I come from New Jersey. Yes, I know it's a shock if you've watched Jersey Shore or The Sopranos, but we do have farms in New Jersey. You think corn, cranberries, tomatoes, even vineyards. And we ourselves, we have about 100 head of cows, belted Galloways. My wife does it more than I do. She'll go to the auctions for used bulldozers and the like. So there's more to New Jersey than what you see on TV. But what is fun to be here today and to be amongst you is you exemplify that the real wealth, the real capital of any society is the human mind. Just ask yourself a question that Tom Sowell and others have asked. What is the difference between us today and people of the Stone Age? The answer is we know more. We have more knowledge. And even if you get great catastrophes, man-made catastrophes, natural catastrophes, if knowledge is not destroyed, you can rebuild and move forward. You saw that at the end of World War II. Tens of millions of lives lost. Physical devastation in Europe and in Japan. Nuclear weapons used in Japan. And yet, contrary to experts' expectations, within a few years after the war, these economies were producing above what they did before the war. Why? Because knowledge was not destroyed. And this is nowhere more true than in agriculture about knowledge. Most people don't appreciate that agriculture has been in the forefront of technology for over 1,300 years. Epic story, unknown. You start with Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire during the so-called Dark Ages. Actually, you saw agricultural innovation. New kind of padding for horse collars that placed a weight on the horse's shoulders where they could pull more and pull it faster. You know, in the old days they had oxen. In Europe, thanks to these new collars they invented during a time when everyone thought nothing was happening, you could get plowing done faster, agriculture output went up, replaced the ox. The heavy-wheeled plow, huge advance from what they had in Rome, also increased agricultural output. What they call, as you well know, the three-field system. Romans used just two. Europeans came up with field for a winter crop, field for the spring crop, one lying fallow, discovered that legumes help restore the land, and vast increases in food that helped the rise of European towns and then cities. Hard to believe today, but it was thought back in Roman times northern European soil was no good for agriculture. Thanks to these advances, that was turned on its head, became an agricultural output. In the United States, as you well know and you exemplify it, we're always looking for ways to improve. Whether it's the McCormick Reaper, the Deere plow in the 1830s, you know, the Midwest soil was once thought to be inhospitable for agriculture. It was just too tough. Deere invents this steel plow, turns this area into a cornucopia. And like Northern Europe, soil that was once thought inhospitable to agriculture turned out to be just the opposite. Starting in the 20s and 30s, development of hybrid seeds. And even today, you have indoor farming. Who would have thought it? I haven't tried it in my kitchen yet, but you know, it's... And then you have a rise of refrigeration. And this all talk of robotics, you know, that robots are going to replace everything. Robots have been around for a long time. We just don't realize it because they don't look like robots. But think of it. You know, what's a washing machine? It's a robot that does the washing instead of you having to do with it. You know, in the old days when you had to do clothing, washing was a very, very laborious thing. So the robot now does it for you. Same with dishwashers. The biggest robot of them all was in your industry. Started to rise up in the teens and 20s, the tractor. In the old days, as you know, literally millions of acres had to be set aside for forage for farm animals. Now that acreage could be free, either to revert for other uses or to grow more food. Norman Borlaug, as you know, who won the Nobel Prize, the father of the Green Revolution, exemplified what you're doing here today in terms of high-tech innovation. Pioneered seeds in Mexico that made that self-sufficient country in grains in the 1940s and 50s. Then he goes to India and Pakistan, does the same thing there. Between 1965 and 1970, two areas of the world that were always being hit by famines. Within a period of 5 years, the output of wheat almost doubled. Extraordinary. And so they became not only self-sufficient, but in some cases exporters. Famine was banished. Sad thing is, you can tell I'm not running for anything, but the sad thing is, too many times these great advances are fiercely resisted. When Borlaug went to Africa to try to do the same thing that he did in Asia, met with fierce resistance, not so much from people there, but from extremists in Europe and elsewhere. Real fight to help people have more food and a better living. But his work has been calculated to save 1 billion people from starvation. Now, obviously, he didn't do it alone, had teams and teams interacting with each other, but that's a heroic story in agriculture. You see it today. I was mentioning some people earlier about drones. Why in the world the FAA and others have dragged their feet for so long in allowing ag to use drones the way they should? It's just one of these things that's just going to have people shaking their heads in the future. Whether it's spraying and treating crops, more targeted fertilizing, better use of water, labor, tracking crop health and the like. This is great stuff. Same thing with satellite navigation networks. Now even the tractor. They're now having tractors where you don't even have to have a robot. There was a farm in Canada that did some experimentation where these machines were going amongst each other, looked like would hit each other, but no, they knew when to turn when they were near each other. Extraordinary. Now today, as you know, but we got to get the word out, ag is the most technologically integrated industry in the world. Just think of it. Plant breeders, genetics, transgenetics, agronomy, biochemistry, engineering, soil technology, entomology, software, plant pathology, soil pathology, robotics, statistical modeling, and high finance are all involved in getting food on the world's tables. Advances like GPS, what's coming in G5, intensive data mining, micro-targeting of nutrients, joystick control of equipment, precise field mapping, transgenic seeds, micro-water management, among the many advances that are coming. They're happening here, and thanks to our example all around the world. Mentioned in Israel, one of the things they have there now are these reusable trays, plastic trays, for certain trees and crops where they gather the dew in the evening. In fact, it helps feed them water, can cut their water use by as much as 50%. Things like that happening all the time. Now, I told some people earlier, and a couple of people actually remembered it. They were old enough to remember it, but you may have seen it anyway on cable. Remember the movie The Graduate? And yeah, there's some interesting parts. And but the memorable thing when the guy says to Dustin Hoffman, "Son, plastics. The future is plastics." Yes, I see somebody got onto that. Well, it could be that the real future is really ag tech. That is the future. In terms of feeding billions of people today and billions of people tomorrow, more billions, and better than ever before. If artificial roadblocks are not put in, it will be done. And not only people will get the basics, but they'll have more choice than ever before, more easier delivery than ever before. If you want food grown in a certain way, done. People will get it to you in more and more cheaper ways. I mentioned water, and about Israel. When I first spoke here 2 years ago, I'd just come back from there and was astonished to find, Israel's in the desert. Rainfall had been falling, so you'd think they would have had what California had until recently, a water crisis. But the Israelis recognize better than some people here in this state. You can tell I'm not running here, but that if you unleash human ingenuity, you won't have a water crisis. Now, the modern state was founded in 1948. Since then, the population has increased more than tenfold, agricultural production 16-fold, industrial production 50-fold. And yet the net use of water, not per capita, but the net use of water in that country today, overall use of water today, net use is 10% less today than it was almost 70 years ago. Why? What you exemplify, human ingenuity. They don't, as this state does, pour tens of billions of gallons of water for whatever reason into the ocean. I haven't figured that one out yet, but you do it. They build desalination plants. Now, you have one here in California. It took about, what, 15, 20, 200 years to get all the permissions. Ended up costing about 3 or 4 times what a typical one in Israel costs, half the capacity. That is a self-inflicted wound, not by you, but by those who should know better. California should have an abundance of water, and when you get the rainfalls that we had, where were the reservoirs to make sure we could bank it for future use? I hadn't done that in decades. So this is self-inflicted, but what it also gets to is that seemingly impossible problems today are with human ingenuity and the kind of research you are doing on a daily basis. They'll resolve them and do so in a way that's cheaper and cheaper, and then we take them for granted. An example of the kind of ingenuity is bees. For whatever reason, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a collapse in the the number of bees. They were dying. Nobody could figure out why. They thought it might be a certain kind of pesticide, which the Europeans, of course, then banned, but they still have the same problem we have here, so that wasn't the problem. But instead of just shaking their hands, what did beekeepers do? You know the importance of bees better than most people, is they put ingenuity to use, growing commercial bees, growing commercial queen bee breeders, splitting healthy colonies more and more frequently, new treatments. And the result is, even though you had this collapse, they've managed to keep the population from disappearing, and there's more honey today than when that collapse began 10 years ago. Human ingenuity. Now there's also good news too. We're finally getting some help from whatever, I don't know. But satellites now show, and this hasn't gotten much play, is that the green vegetation on the Earth has increased in the last 30 years by 14%. That's the equivalent of 2 North American continents. Deserts are being reclaimed. And you know what the principal cause is? Do I dare say it? CO2. Carbon dioxide. You know what carbon dioxide can do in greenhouses and the like, properly used and increasing productivity. Well, it's happening around the world. You never hear about it. So there are challenges out there. EPA, I mentioned the drones, water, labor, battles against ignorance. But these are things that we've got to just get the message out there. And instead of extremists and regulators fighting you, they should be worshiping you. You are the salvation. Without food, we have nothing. We won't have a health care crisis. We won't have anything without food. So, led by agriculture today, and again, you don't read this very much, led by agriculture, each day in the world, 137,000 people leave dire poverty. Over 1.5 billion in the last 30 years. Now, this doesn't mean they're living in a nice suburb, but going from the absolute extreme where they're on the verge of losing their lives, going above that. And if we remove some of these artificial obstacles, it won't just be getting above subsistence, but truly in the future for abundance. So, let's fight that ignorance. And in the meantime, we're delighted to be working with you. And I just want to say, even on the part of the ignoramuses, they don't realize it, but they should be saying, as I will do now, thank you for what you do. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.